Everyone at our Christmas party thought the woman sitting beside my husband was just a co-worker. She was laughing at his jokes, wearing the designer sweater I'd bought him last month, holding a perfectly wrapped gift box with my signature ribbon style. What she didn't know was that inside that box was documentation of their courthouse wedding, a wedding that happened while Mark was still legally married to me. And in exactly 5 minutes, the slideshow on our living room TV was going to start playing those wedding photos. Photos I discovered 3 days ago when Mark accidentally left his other phone in the guest bathroom. This story begins last December. But really, the foundation was laid 8 years earlier when I married a man who seemed ambitious, charming, and devoted. Mark worked in commercial real estate development, and when we met, he presented himself as someone building an empire from nothing. What I didn't realize until much later was that his empire was actually built on my family's connections, my inherited properties, and eventually, my money. The warning signs started small. A joint account that seemed to drain faster than it should. Business trips that lasted longer than necessary. A sudden interest in keeping his phone face minus down at all times. But like most people who want to believe in their marriage, I made excuses. He's working hard. He's planning a surprise. By the time his birthday rolled around last year, we'd been married for 8 years. And from the outside, we looked stable. We had a beautiful home in a good neighborhood, successful careers, and a social circle that envied our seemingly perfect life. Behind closed doors, though, Mark had become someone who treated me more like a business asset than a wife. I organized his life, managed our home, entertained his colleagues, and somehow became invisible in the process. Mark insisted on combining his birthday with our annual Christmas party because he loved being the center of attention, and because he knew people felt obligated to bring gifts for both occasions. I spent 2 full days cooking his favorite dishes, decorating the house with the exact aesthetic he'd critiqued me into perfecting, wrapping gifts for guests he'd invited without consulting me. The morning of the party, while I was arranging charcuterie boards in the kitchen, Mark walked through pointing out everything that wasn't quite right. The tree lights were too warm minus toned. The cheese selection was too basic. The wine I'd chosen was acceptable but not impressive. He offered no help, just observations, as if I were staff rather than his partner. Guests started arriving around 5 in the evening. His co-workers from the development firm. His family, his mother Linda, his sister Rachel, and her husband. A few friends from college who only appeared when free food and alcohol were involved. The house filled quickly with noise, laughter, and that particular brand of forced holiday cheer that happens when people gather out of obligation rather than genuine affection. That's when Jenna arrived. She walked in with one of Mark's colleagues, a guy named David who I'd met maybe twice at company events. But while David headed straight for the bar, Jenna made a beeline for Mark. She settled onto the couch beside him with the ease of someone who'd sat there 1,000 times before, immediately leaning into his space, touching his arm when she laughed, speaking in that low, familiar tone that only comes from genuine intimacy. I noticed everything about her in those first few minutes. The way her hair was styled exactly like mine had been in our wedding photos, long, dark, with subtle highlights. The expensive handbag that matched the one I'd asked Mark to buy me for our anniversary, the one he'd said was too impractical. The confidence in her posture that suggested she wasn't worried about being watched. When I walked over to introduce myself, Mark barely looked up. "This is Jenna. She's from the office," he said. Then immediately turned back to the conversation they'd been having, effectively dismissing me from my own living room. Jenna smiled at me, not warm, not cold, just polite, and said it was nice to finally meet me. As if Mark had been talking about me, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. I went back to the kitchen feeling unsettled, but not yet alarmed. Mark had plenty of female colleagues. Professional relationships often look friendly. I was probably reading too much into body language. But as the evening progressed, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. Jenna stayed within 3 feet of Mark at all times. When he got up to refill his drink, she followed. When he told a story, she laughed before the punchline, the way someone does when they've already heard it. And most damning of all, his family didn't seem surprised by her presence. His mother acknowledged her with a knowing nod. His sister made room for her at the table without being asked. They all knew something I didn't. The gift exchange started around 8. We'd set up a small mountain of wrapped presents beneath the Christmas tree, a tradition Mark loved because it made him look generous and successful. He always went first, making a show of handing out gifts to key guests, while everyone watched and complimented his thoughtfulness. This year, he picked up a small silver box, the kind that usually holds jewelry, and handed it to Jenna before he handed me anything. The room got quieter. Not silent, but that particular kind of anticipatory quiet where people sense drama coming and want to witness it. Jenna opened the box with practiced surprise, as if she knew exactly what was inside but wanted to perform delight for the audience. She pulled out a silver bracelet with small diamond accents, the kind of delicate, expensive piece that says "I think about you" rather than "Happy Holidays." I recognized it immediately. Not because I'd seen that exact bracelet before, but because I'd pointed out something nearly identical in a jewelry store 3 months earlier when Mark and I were shopping for his mother's birthday gift. How it would go with everything. Mark had glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds before saying we should keep looking. Apparently, he'd gone back and bought it. Just not for me. "Mark," I said, loud enough that several conversations stopped. "Why are you giving her that?" He looked at me with that particular expression he'd perfected over the years, the one that suggested I was being unreasonable about something completely innocent. "It's just a Christmas gift. Everyone's getting something. Not everyone's getting jewelry. She's been helping me with a major project at work. It's a thank-you gift." The way he said it was so casual, so practiced, that I knew he'd prepared this explanation in advance. He'd expected me to question it and had his response ready. Jenna, to her credit or her calculation, didn't say anything. She just sat there holding the bracelet, watching our interaction with an expression I couldn't quite read. That's when Mark's mother spoke up. "Oh, don't be dramatic about it. Mark's just being generous like he always is." Linda had never particularly liked me. I'd known this for years but pretended otherwise because Mark insisted family harmony was important. She'd always treated me like I was temporary, someone her son would eventually upgrade from. Now, watching her defend his gift to another woman, I realized she'd probably been waiting for that upgrade. "I'm not being dramatic," I said, keeping my voice level even though my hands were shaking. "I'm asking my husband why he's giving expensive jewelry to a woman I've never met before tonight." Mark stood up, and suddenly he wasn't pretending to be confused anymore. "You know what? If you're going to make a scene at my birthday party, maybe you should leave." The room went completely silent then. His sister Rachel was staring at her phone, deliberately not looking at anyone. David, who brought Jenna, had disappeared toward the bathroom. The other guests were frozen mid-conversation, realizing they were witnessing something far more interesting than holiday small talk. "I should leave," I repeated slowly. "This is my house." "It's our house," Mark corrected, "and I'm not going to let you ruin a night because you're insecure." That word, insecure, was his favorite weapon. Anytime I questioned anything, anytime I expressed discomfort or asked for explanation, I was being insecure. It was his way of making my legitimate concerns sound like personal failings. But this time, in front of all these people, it felt different. It felt like exposure. "Fine," I said. "Then tell everyone who Jenna really is. Tell them why she's so comfortable in our home. Tell them why your whole family seems to already know her." Mark's jaw tightened. Jenna had gone very still, the bracelet clutched in her hand. I don't owe you an explanation in front of everyone, he said quietly. Then louder, if you can't behave like an adult. You need to leave. He walked to the front door and opened it. Outside, it was pouring rain, one of those heavy December storms that soaks through clothing in seconds. The kind of night where even stepping onto the porch means coming back inside dripping. I looked around the room. At his mother, who was watching me with barely concealed satisfaction, still pretending to be absorbed in her phone. At the co-workers and friends who'd come to celebrate Mark, not to defend me. Sitting in my spot on my couch, wearing the bracelet my husband had bought her. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet and walked out. Mark closed the door behind me and I heard the lock click into place. Standing on that porch in the rain, watching through the front window as the party resumed, as people went back to drinking and laughing and opening gifts, as if nothing had happened, I felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak. Not even anger yet. Just a cold, clear understanding that the man I'd married had stopped existing years ago, and I'd been living with a stranger who wore his face. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes before I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew would answer at 11 at night during a rainstorm. My Aunt Ellen. Ellen wasn't actually my aunt. She was my mother's college roommate who'd stayed close to the family, but I'd called her Aunt Ellen since childhood. What Mark didn't know about Ellen, what most people didn't know, was that she'd spent 30 years as a private investigator before retiring. She specialized in corporate fraud and marital deception, and she had a network of contacts that could pull information most people didn't even know existed. She answered on the second ring. What happened? I told her everything in maybe 3 minutes. The party, the bracelet, the lock minus out. There was a long pause. Stay exactly where you are. I'm 20 minutes away. Ellen, it's almost midnight. I've been tracking Mark for 3 weeks. Stay there. The line went dead. I stood in the rain, replaying what she'd just said. She'd been tracking Mark? For 3 weeks? 20 minus 2 minutes later. A black sedan pulled up in front of the house. Ellen got out carrying an umbrella and a leather portfolio folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents. She was 70-1 years old, but moved like someone half her age. Crossing the lawn in expensive boots that suggested this wasn't her first late-night confrontation in bad weather. You're soaked, she said, pulling me under the umbrella. Good. Let's go make him uncomfortable. She walked up to the front door and knocked. Not a timid knock, but the kind that says I know you're in there and I'm not leaving. Mark opened it, annoyed. Can I help you? He didn't recognize her. We'd only seen Ellen a handful of times over the years, usually at big family events, and Mark had never paid attention to anyone who wasn't useful to him. I'm Ellen Crawford. I believe you know my niece. She gestured to me. We need to have a conversation about your marriage. All of your marriages, actually. Mark's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough that I knew Ellen had hit something real. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his hand tightened on the doorframe. Then you won't mind if we come inside and clear things up. Ellen didn't wait for permission. She stepped past him into the entry hall, and after a moment's hesitation, I followed. The party noise had died down. People were watching now, curious about the strange woman who'd just walked in dripping rainwater on the hardwood floors. Ellen scanned the room until her eyes landed on Jenna. You must be Mrs. Morrison. The second Mrs. Morrison, I should say. Jenna's face went white. I'm not married, she said, but her voice wavered. According to the Clark County, Nevada Marriage License Bureau, you married Mark Morrison on August 14th of this year at the downtown Vegas wedding chapel. Would you like to see the certificate? Ellen opened her portfolio and pulled out a document. Even from where I stood, I could see the official seal, the signatures, the date. Mark moved toward her. Where did you get that? Public records, Ellen said calmly. Marriage licenses are filed with the county. Anyone can access them if they know where to look. Which I do, because finding hidden marriages is literally what I did for a living. She turned to address the room. I apologize for interrupting the party, but I think everyone here should know that Mark has been living a double life for at least 8 months. He's legally married to my niece. They wed in 2016 and never divorced, which makes his August marriage to Jenna bigamy, which is a felony in California. The room exploded. Jenna was on her feet, her voice shaking. He told me he was divorced. He said the paperwork was finalized years ago. He lied, Ellen said simply. The marriage is still active. I have the records. Mark was trying to talk over everyone, his voice rising. This is insane. That Vegas thing was just for fun. It wasn't real. You signed a legal document. You obtained a marriage license. You filed it with the county. It's real. Jenna turned to Mark. And I watched in real minus time as 8 months of her life recalculated itself. You told me you were separated. You said she was trying to get money from you in the divorce. I was protecting you from. You're still wearing your wedding ring. Jenna's voice cracked. I asked you about it and you said it was easier than explaining to clients. Can everyone just calm down? Mark tried. Ellen held up another document. This is a bank statement for an account opened in June under Morrison Holdings LLC. The account is jointly held by Mark and Jenna. Over the past 6 months, approximately $240,000 has been transferred into it from Mark's joint account with my niece. Since that account is marital property, and since my niece never authorized these transfers, that's embezzlement. Linda stood up. This is ridiculous. Your name appears on several transfers as well, Mrs. Morrison. Ellen didn't even look at her. Along with your daughter Rachel's. You've both been helping move money into accounts he controls separately from his wife. That makes you accessories to fraud. Rachel dropped her phone. The room had gone completely silent except for the rain hammering against the windows. Ellen pulled out another sheet. This is a rental agreement for an apartment in Santa Monica. Mark Morrison is listed as the guarantor and rent payer for tenant Jenna Clark. Rent is $40–200 monthly. Paid from the Morrison Holdings account again. Funded by money that belongs to my niece. She looked at Jenna. Did you know he was using his wife's money to pay for your apartment? Jenna shook her head slowly, but I didn't know if I believed her. Ellen continued. I have hotel receipts, flight bookings, credit card statements, text messages recovered from cloud backups, photos from the Vegas wedding with 60–3 guests in attendance, and a paper trail showing Mark has been systematically draining marital assets to fund a separate life with Jenna, while telling his wife they needed to cut back on expenses because business was slow. She turned to me. He told you the company was struggling, right? That's why you've been paying most of the household bills for the past year. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The company is fine. He just wanted access to your income while he moved your savings elsewhere. Mark finally found words. You can't prove any of this would hold up in court. I've been an expert witness in 17 fraud cases. I know exactly what holds up in court. And I've already sent copies of everything to a forensic accountant and to an attorney who specializes in marital fraud. They're reviewing it tonight. She looked around the room. I'm sorry to ruin the party, but I thought everyone should know who they're really celebrating. A man who married 2 women, lied to both of them, stole from one to fund his life with the other, and involved his own family in covering it up. Linda was staring at Mark with an expression I couldn't identify. Horror? Disappointment? Calculation about how this would affect her. Rachel had tears running down her face. But she wasn't making any sound. Jenna had sat back down on the couch, still holding that bracelet, looking like someone who'd just watched her entire reality collapse. And Mark looked like a man who just realized the game was over and he'd lost spectacularly. I think, Ellen said quietly, that this party is finished. Unless anyone has questions they'd like to ask Mark about which version of his life was actually real. No one spoke. One by one, people started gathering their coats. David left first, practically running. Then Mark's college friends. Then the co-workers who suddenly remembered they had early mornings. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty except for me, Ellen, Mark, Linda, Rachel, and Jenna. Linda was the first to speak. Mark, tell me this isn't true. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mom, it's complicated. Did you marry her? Linda pointed at Jenna without looking at her. Technically, yes, but while you were still married to her. Now Linda pointed at me. Silence. Get out, Linda said quietly. None. Get out of this house. Now, I will not watch you destroy what's left of this family's reputation. This is my house, Mark started. No, Ellen interrupted. It's not. The property deed is held in trust under your wife's name through her family's estate structure. You live here, you don't own it, which means right now you're trespassing. I watched Mark's face as this information hit him. He'd always talked about our house as if he'd bought it, as if it was his achievement. He'd never asked about the paperwork, never checked whose name was actually on the deed. You need to leave, I said. My voice sounded strange, calm, almost distant. You and Jenna. Tonight. Jenna stood up shakily. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was still married. But you knew about the money, Ellen said. It wasn't a question. Jenna hesitated. He said it was his business profits. He said he was investing in our future, using funds stolen from his wife. Whether you knew where it came from or not, you benefited from it. That's a problem. Jenna looked at Mark, and I saw the moment she realized he wasn't going to save her. He was too busy trying to save himself. She walked out without another word, still clutching the bracelet. Mark turned to me. We can fix this. We can sit down and talk. The time for talking ended when you locked me outside in the rain. I said. Isn't it? He had no answer for that. Ellen handed him a business card. This is my attorney's contact information. You should get your own lawyer. You're going to need one. Mark looked at his mother one last time, but Linda had turned away, her hand pressed to her mouth. He left. The sound of the door closing behind him was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Linda and Rachel followed shortly after. Linda pausing only to say, I'm sorry, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I didn't know if she was apologizing for Mark's actions or for her own complicity. And I didn't ask. When they were gone, Ellen and I sat in the wreckage of the party. Half minus empty glasses on every surface. Torn wrapping paper under the tree. The bracelet Jenna had left on the couch cushion, glinting in the Christmas lights. How long have you known? I asked. 3 weeks. You called me last month and said something felt wrong, but you couldn't identify what. So I started digging. Found the Vegas marriage first, then the bank accounts, then everything else. I was going to tell you after Christmas. Why didn't you? Because I wanted to have everything documented first. In cases like this, you only get one chance to present evidence before people start hiding things. I needed it to be airtight. She was right. If she'd told me earlier, I might have confronted Mark privately. He would have had time to cover his tracks, move money, delete records. By waiting until this moment, until he'd publicly humiliated me in front of witnesses, Ellen had ensured that everyone saw the truth at once, with no opportunity for spin control. What happens now? I asked. Now we file for divorce and press charges. Bigamy is a felony. Financial fraud is a felony. He's looking at serious legal consequences, not just a messy divorce. Will Jenna face charges too? Ellen considered. Depends on what we can prove she knew. The apartment rent, the joint account, the wedding itself. Those are all suspicious. But if she can convince a prosecutor she genuinely believed he was divorced, she might avoid criminal charges. She'll definitely face civil liability, though. Any money she received will need to be returned. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Something. Instead, I just felt tired. I'm going to make some coffee, Ellen said. Then we're going to go through everything one more time and make sure we haven't missed anything. Tomorrow we file paperwork. The day after this becomes official. But tonight, you should rest. I didn't rest that night. I sat at the kitchen table while Ellen made calls to lawyers and accountants who apparently worked at midnight on December 26th if Ellen Crawford asked them to. I listened to her describe the situation in clinical terms: asset misappropriation, fraudulent conveyance, breach of fiduciary duty, turning my destroyed marriage into a case file. Around 3 a.m, her forensic accountant sent over a preliminary report. Her expression growing darker with each page. He's been planning this for at least 2 years, she said finally. Long before he met Jenna. What do you mean? These accounts, these transfers, they're to organize, to be impulsive. He started moving money out of joint accounts into separate structures in early 2022, small amounts at first, then larger ones. He created Morrison Holdings specifically to hide assets from you. Why? Ellen looked at me over her reading glasses. My guess? He was planning to divorce you eventually, but wanted to make sure he took as much as possible first. Jenna wasn't the exit strategy. She was just an opportunity he took advantage of along the way. That hurt more than the affair somehow. The idea that Mark hadn't fallen in love with someone else and made impulsive decisions. He'd been methodically planning to leave me while still sleeping beside me every night, still letting me organize his life, still accepting everything I did for him while secretly dismantling our marriage. The Vegas wedding was probably his mistake. Ellen continued. He got arrogant, thought he could have both lives running simultaneously. Jenna probably pressured him for some kind of commitment, and instead of being honest with either of you, he decided to just commit fraud. Can we prove he was planning to leave? We don't need to prove intent. We just need to prove he stole marital assets and committed bigamy. The rest is just context. Over the next 3 days, Ellen transformed my living room into a war room. Documents covered every surface. Her team of lawyers brought in 3 specialists worked in shifts, building a case that would be filed in family court and criminal court simultaneously. I answered thousands of questions. When did you first notice money missing? When did Mark start traveling more? When did his behavior change? Did he have access to your email, your bank passwords, your business accounts? The answers painted a picture of systematic manipulation. Mark had positioned himself as the financially savvy partner, taking over management of our accounts to make things easier for me. He'd convinced me that his frequent absences were necessary for work. He'd isolated me from questioning anything by making me feel like I was being paranoid or insecure whenever I asked for clarity. Classic financial abuse tactics, according to Ellen's attorneys. On December 29th, we filed divorce petition with a request for immediate seizure of all marital assets, criminal complaint for bigamy, civil complaint for fraud and conversion of assets, restraining order preventing Mark from accessing any jointly held property or accounts. By noon that day, every account Mark had access to was frozen. Every credit card was canceled. Every business entity he controlled was locked pending investigation. His phone started blowing up immediately, I know because Ellen had access to records showing incoming call volume to his number. 30-7 calls in the first hour. Business partners wondering what was happening, and Janet trying to figure out if her apartment rent was about to disappear. Mark tried to call me 16 times that day. I didn't answer. He tried to come to the house twice. The first time, Ellen answered the door and handed him a restraining order. The second time, the police responded to his attempt to enter with his old key. The locks had been changed within hours of Ellen's arrival and warned him that violating a restraining order was grounds for arrest. By New Year's Eve, the story had leaked. I don't know who talked, maybe one of the party guests, maybe someone from the courthouse. But suddenly reporters were calling. Local news picked it up first. Santa Monica, a man charged with bigamy fraud. Then it spread online. Reddit threads, true crime forums, Twitter accounts dedicated to relationship drama. Mark's LinkedIn profile went from professional and polished to bombed with comments from people calling him a fraud. His company's Yelp reviews filled with references to his personal life. Someone found Jenna's Instagram and figured out the timeline, and suddenly she was being called a home-wrecker and worse in hundreds of comments. I felt sorry for her briefly. Then I remembered she'd been living in an apartment paid for with my money, wearing jewelry bought with my money, traveling to places I'd wanted to visit on my money, while I stayed home thinking we couldn't afford a vacation. My sympathy evaporated quickly. The first hearing was scheduled for January 15th. Mark showed up in a suit that looked cheap. Probably because all his expensive ones were still in the house he could no longer access. His lawyer was young and looked overwhelmed. Probably someone who'd agreed to take the case before realizing how bad it was. Jenna wasn't there. According to Ellen's sources, she'd moved back to her parents' house in Arizona and was facing her own legal trouble as her bank tried to claw back funds she'd spent from the disputed account. The judge was a woman in her 60s who'd apparently seen everything during 30 years on the bench. And she looked at Mark the way you'd look at something stuck to your shoe. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by your wife's legal team. Before we proceed, I need to understand something. Did you actually believe you wouldn't get caught?" Mark's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client made some poor decisions in his personal life. I'm asking him, counselor." Mark cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the situation is more complicated than it looks, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you married someone while already married. You stole money from your wife to fund that second relationship, and you involved family members in concealing it. What's complicated about that?" Silence. "Here's what's going to happen," the judge continued. "All marital assets are frozen pending full forensic audit. You are prohibited from contacting either wife. You are prohibited from accessing any property, accounts, or assets that may be considered marital or obtained through marital funds. You will surrender all keys, passwords, and access credentials to the court within 20-4 hours. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Now let's talk about the criminal charges." The hearing lasted 40-3 minutes. By the end of it, Mark's bail was set at $50,000, which he couldn't pay because his accounts were frozen and he was required to wear an ankle monitor while awaiting trial. He left the courthouse in handcuffs. Ellen and I watched from across the street. "Feel better?" she asked. "Not really," I admitted. "I feel that's normal. Revenge isn't actually satisfying. Justice is just necessary." Over the following months, the full scope of Mark's deception emerged through depositions and investigations. The Vegas wedding had 60-3 guests, people from his other life that Jenna had believed was his real one. She'd met his college friends, his cousins, people he'd told her about from before the divorce. They'd all played along, either not knowing I existed or not caring. Morrison Holdings LLC had been used to funnel over $340,000 out of our marriage. Some went to Jenna's apartment and expenses. Some went to a vacation property in Palm Springs that Mark had been listing on Airbnb without my knowledge. Some simply disappeared into accounts we never fully traced. Probably money he'd moved offshore. Linda and Rachel had helped by accepting gifts from Mark, expensive items bought with marital funds, then resold or transferred to make money harder to track. Linda claimed she didn't know the money was stolen, but emails showed Mark explicitly telling her to help him protect assets from the divorce he was planning. Jenna eventually cooperated with investigators in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She provided texts, emails, financial records, photos, everything that documented her relationship with Mark. It turned out he'd told her I was abusive, that I'd cheated on him, that I was mentally unstable and trying to take everything in a divorce he'd already filed for. She'd believed every word. Reading those messages, seeing how Mark had described me to another woman was somehow worse than discovering the affair itself. He'd turned me into a villain in a story where he was the victim, and he'd been convincing enough that Jenna had genuinely thought she was saving him. The divorce was finalized in September. I got the house, which I'd owned all along. I got every cent that could be traced back to marital accounts. I got his retirement accounts, his business interests, and a judgment against him for liquidated damages that he'd be paying off for years. Mark got bankruptcy, a criminal record, and a reputation that would follow him everywhere he went for the rest of his life. The criminal trial happened in November, almost a full year after that Christmas party. Mark pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. Bigamy, wire fraud, identity theft. He got 3 years in county jail with possibility of parole after 18 months. Gina attended his sentencing. I don't know why. Maybe she needed closure. Maybe she still loved him despite everything. When it was over, we accidentally made eye contact in the courthouse hallway. She looked like she wanted to say something. I waited. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. She'd been a victim of Mark's lies too, just a different kind. She nodded once and walked away. I never saw her again. Mark's mother reached out to me that December, exactly 1 year after the party. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no, but Ellen advised me to hear her out. We met at a neutral location. Linda looked older than she had a year ago, more fragile. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For everything. For believing Mark's version of events. For helping him hide things from you. For not standing up for you when I should have." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Because he's my son, and I wanted to believe he wasn't capable of what he was actually doing. When he told me you two were having problems, that you were difficult, that you didn't understand him, I believed it, because it was easier than admitting my son was a criminal. You transferred money for him. You knew it was wrong." "I did. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." She paused. "I've set up a fund in your name. It's not enough to make up for what was taken, but it's everything I received from Mark that came from you. With interest. My lawyer has the details." I didn't know what to say. "I don't expect forgiveness," Linda continued. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what we did to you. And I'm sorry." She left before I could respond. The fund turned out to be over $80,000, her attempt at restitution. I donated it to an organization that helps women escape financial abuse. Now it's been over 2 years since that Christmas party. Mark is still in jail. He'll probably get out sometime next year. Jenna moved to Colorado and, according to social media, is engaged to someone who hopefully treats her better than Mark did. Ellen retired for real this time, but we have dinner once a month. She's writing a book about financial fraud in marriages. My case is featured prominently, though with names changed. As for me, I sold the house. Too many memories, even though most of them were fake. I moved to a smaller place near the ocean, started therapy, and learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. People ask if I'm dating yet. I'm not. Maybe someday, but right now, I'm relearning who I am when I'm not managing someone else's life, covering for someone else's lies, or making excuses for someone else's cruelty. And honestly, I like her. The woman I'm becoming is stronger than the one who stood on that porch in the rain, locked out of her own home. She knows what she's worth now, and she won't settle for less ever again.